Hey folks, I want to give you a quick overview of today's assignment. You're gonna be working in the student journal, section 8.1, starting at page 245. You'll see that this is all about graphing quadratic equations, and we have a quadratic equation in the form of y equals ax squared. I'm going to remind you guys that whenever you see something like f of x, by the way, that's how it's pronounced, f with parentheses x, essentially that just means y. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that. And by the way, as you go through this assignment, you'll see that we can have other letters in there other than F. It could be G of X, and that is also just considered to be Y. And they're not necessarily the same Y, but essentially F of X and G of X are a way of saying Y. Or ultimately, what we're really saying is that f is a function of x and g is a function of x. And it turns out a lot of times when we write equations, y is a function of x. Y equals something times x, or y equals x raised to some power. Y is a function of x. This way, I'll talk more about what this notation is good for at another time. Anyways, you're going to try to graph some equations that are in the form y equals some number a times x squared. Very simple quadratic. It's the most simple quadratic that we can get. Now, speaking of most simple quadratic, let's go ahead and take a look at the very first page. I'm going to have you guys do an exploration. And when you go to do the exploration, you're going to be using Desmos. I'm gonna have you use Desmos so you can make your life easier. Now, what you'll do is you'll go and you'll try to put something like this: y equals 3x squared into Desmos, and then you'll get the graph, and then you'll go ahead and you'll graph onto this coordinate plane. Now, you might be saying, well, wait a second, but there's already a graph there. Yeah, but that graph that's already there is y equals x squared. And by the way, this graph is also y equals x squared, and this graph is y equals x squared, and this graph is y equals x squared. The point of this exercise is for you to get a sense of how graphing y equals 3x squared and graphing y equals negative 0.2x squared, what I want you to do is get a sense of how these graphs are different than the graph of y equals x squared, and also how they're similar. And along those lines, there's something that I want you to look for when you do these first four graphs, this exploration. I would like you to compare graph A and graph D, and I would like you to tell me what is similar about them and what is different. And then I'd like you to do the same thing with graph B and graph C. I'd like you to compare and tell me what's similar about those and what's different. So maybe let's make it so that it's real easy for you. In your student journal, you'll have something like let's go A and D, and then you'll put what is similar and what is different. And this is in addition to actually graphing y equals 3x squared, y equals negative 5x squared, etc. So you're going to explain to me what's similar about A and D and what is different. And then you'll do the same thing for B and C. So do this over here. B and C, what is similar and what is different. Now, I'm asking you to do this because I want you to understand. I don't just want you to do the math and get the answer. I want you to understand. And I have to tell you this. If you understand, you're going to like this stuff a whole lot better. And by the way, we're only at the beginning. We've got a ton of this quadratic stuff to do. And my hope is that if you can nail down this stuff at the beginning and really understand it, everything else will fall into place for you. Okay, so that's your assignment. Let me make sure that we agree on what you're going to do in Desmos. So in Desmos, let's take a look. you're going to do something like, I'll give you a slightly different one than any of those there. We'll do something like maybe h of x. And by the way, you can use y if you'd like, or h of x, just to get a feel for do they do the same thing. H of x equals, let's do, how about, let's do a fraction. Let's do 3/5 x to the power of 2. And let's see here. By the way, for me to get to the power of 2, there's a couple ways you could do it. You could do it through the keyboard down here, but you can also do it with there's a character on your keyboard. It's if you hit Shift 6 on your keyboard, there's a little up arrow. That little, if I go X and then Shift 6, it brings it up and lets me put an exponent in. Just FYI. Okay, so anyways, we're back to graphing this function. H of x, or y, equals 3/5 x squared. Here's what the thing looks like. You should experiment around. I wonder what would happen if I made it like m of x, you know, and did exactly the same thing, equals 3/5 x to the power of 2. Do I get exactly the same graph? I hope you're curious. Let's see here. What else? What about if I just made it y equals 3/5 x squared? Again, I think you should play around with it and get a feel for how this stuff works. You will feel so much better when you get this. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff you're going to do in Oh, and let me show you one more important little trick. And that is, what if you want to plot this? Okay, I'm asking you to plot this over here. Let me see if I can show you. I'm asking you to actually graph the graphs for A, B, C, and D. I want you to graph the parabolas on the coordinate planes. That'll be 4 of them. And so how do you take the thing from Desmos? How do you take this and get it on one of these? Well, I'll show you a little trick because I care about you. So what you can do is this. You can go into like the h of x equals 3/5 x squared. And then I think you click this little gear. And when you do, it gives you some extra options. And one of the options is a little table. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that table. And what you can see is it'll give me some x values and it'll give me the y values. And you will graph these x and y values onto your coordinate planes over here. Cool, huh? Okay, and then if you want to get rid of that table, you can always just say bye-bye. That's just fine. Okay, let's get back to the assignment and see what's next. Okay, now after you complete those 4 graphs in that exploration, you're going to come to this next page. And on this next page, I want you to write down some notes, and I'm going to give them to you right now. We're going to do a little dissection here. In biology class, you might have to dissect an animal, but in math class, it's a lot cleaner. We're just going to dissect a drawing. So, I'm going to tell you some of the pieces and the parts of these parabolas that we see graphed here, and I'd like you to write this down and add it to your notes. And later on, you'll need this information for other future assignments. So this line going up and down the middle, there's a special, well actually, let's talk about this parabola has a kind of a pointy part, and that pointy part has a special name, and the special name for that guy is the vertex. Now, there is another interesting thing about parabolas. They are symmetrical. They are one half of them looks like the other half. It's like a mirror reflection. In this case, the parabola is reflected about a line, and the line goes right up and down the middle. And there is actually a name for this line. Now, the equation of this line is, I could give you a general one, but in the case of, in this particular case here, we're just going to give it a name. And for right now, I'd just like you to know that that is known as the axis of symmetry. That's what the name of the line is. Now, I'll give you a little hint. At some point, we're going to want to know the equation of that line, and it's going to go back to something that we talked about a long time ago, Hoy Vux. Okay, how can you tell the equation of a vertical line? Well, this is a vertical line, and therefore it must be x equals some number. Vertical lines have an undefined slope, and they have an equation x equals some number. Okay, anyways, we'll get back to that. Let's see what other fun things we can find here. This guy right here is known as the y-intercept. I hope you remember that whenever your graph crosses the y-axis, that point is always called the y-intercept. We already saw that with linear equations. We'll see that again with other equations, but it's definitely true for quadratics. And what other fun things can we say about this? One thing that's kind of interesting about it is that there are no x-axis crossings. In other words, there's no x-intercepts. No x-intercepts. Now you'll notice in the graph right next door, there is a couple of x-intercepts. And those are the sorts of things that I'm going to be asking you about in the future when I ask you to identify characteristics of a quadratic function and its graph. I'll want you to be able to tell me where the vertex is. What's the vertex? What are the coordinates of the vertex? I'd like you to be able to tell me where the y-intercept is and what the coordinates are. I'd like you to be able to tell me what the equation of the axis of symmetry is. And one last thing is that I'd like to know whether the if this guy was graphed, if the equation looks something like y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, I'd like to know whether you believe the A is positive or negative. And I'm going to give you a little, well, I'll pause for a moment. You can pause the video. You guess, is the A going to be positive here or negative? And if you want, you can cheat and you can go back and look at your student journal exploration and see. Otherwise, I'm about to tell you. I believe for graph number 1, A is going to be greater than 0, and that means A is going to be positive. And in general, I want to point something out to you. This particular graph in number 1 is kind of like a smiley face parabola. And when we have a smiley face, that's a terrible parabola, but you kind of get the idea. If we have a smiley face parabola, then our A has a positive attitude. On the other hand, if we have a frowny face parabola, then our A is going to be negative. And I'll just give that to you. A is going to be less than 0. A will be negative for this guy. And again, this is because this parabola is more of like a frowny face. Okay, I would like you to go and identify the y-intercept and the x-intercepts and the axis of symmetry and the vertex on this guy. And then I've got some more work for you to do. Let's take a look at the next part. Okay, for this next page, what you're going to do is you're going to graph the y equals 5x squared and the y equals negative 4x squared, and you'll do that for all the graphs on this page. I didn't include all of their numbers, but I'd like you to do all of them. You can use Desmos, but what's really important here is you're going to do the graph of y equals 5x squared for 3, but you're also going to do the graph, see how it says compare that to the graph of y equals x squared? You're also going to do that. So for all the graphs on this next page, you're going to do the graph that's given and the graph of y equals x squared. And then I want you to look at the two graphs and think about how are they different from one another, or how are they the same? And we're going to relate all this to the A value in each one of these graphs. I am hopeful that you are going to get the idea of how changing A changes the graph when compared to y equals x squared. Okay, so that was a quick description of that page. Again, you can do all the graphs using Desmos, and you can have Desmos make the table if you want. Okay. Oh, wow, that's it. We're right to the end. 9 and 10 are kind of challenging, and if you can't do them, that's fine. We can always talk about them in one of our class meetings, but I'd like you to give it a shot, and I wanted to give you a hint. If you go to page 248, there is a diagram which explains a few things here, and I believe you can use this to answer the 9 and 10 at the bottom of page 249. Now, if you look at page 248 and you look at page 249 and you can't figure out what's going on, don't worry about it. I would be happy to try to explain to you when we get together again. Okay, folks, that was a bit of a marathon video. I appreciate your patience. Good luck. Remember, strive to understand. It will make you feel better. Good luck.